Good evening, I'm Charles Payne. An immigration showdown is underway and terror is impacting the French elections. But first, to the huge agenda push at the White House as President Trump approaches the 100-day mark. A health care vote expected next week, and President Trump says a massive tax cut could also be coming as soon as Wednesday. Roll tape.
We'll be having a big announcement on Wednesday having to do with tax reform. The process has begun long ago, but it really formally begins on Wednesday.
Joining me now, David McIntosh, Tim Phillips, and Adriana Cohen. David, I've got to start with you. I saw you on, I think, earlier in the week with Stuart Varney. You seemed pretty upbeat that perhaps something was coming. The bill that we saw floating around yesterday, I spoke to a couple of Freedom Caucus members, and they didn't seem too thrilled with that. So where are we right now?
On the health care bill?
Yeah, the health care bill.
I think the problem we've got there is the moderates are now holding out against essentially the Pence negotiated provision that would let states waive all of these very expensive Obamacare regulations. Those regulations are the reason that all of our private health care insurance has skyrocketed in the last 8 years. Pence and Meadows negotiated a great compromise that state by state the governors could weigh in and get an opt-out for that. But it's now the moderate Republicans in the House caucus that are really acting more like Democrats and saying we want to keep that.
David, is that because these governors are addicted to federal government money?
No, this all has to do with regulations where the governors could say, look, in my state, we're going to have a free market for health insurance. We don't need these federal regulations. I think we can get cheaper health insurance, better health insurance, if we can just get a waiver from all those requirements. Essentially, we'd love to repeal them, but the states like New York and the liberal states on the East Coast and the West Coast want to keep them. So the compromise is let them keep them, and the states everywhere else that want to have more affordable health care can opt out of them.
Adriana, this tax reform slash cuts, if you will, coming on Wednesday, it feels like it's going to be, well, we hear it's going to be massive, but it also feels like it's going to be extraordinarily complicated, like perhaps they're going to bite off too much. What's your assessment on this? Because this is it. They're coming back to bat and the whole world's watching.
That's right. After the GOP failure, the bill to get passed, President Trump did lose political capital, so he has to get tax reform right. He can't be 0-2. That's just going to be a disaster for him and his future reelection and Republicans. And so they've got to get this right. You know, on the campaign trail, President Trump promised to have massive tax cuts for corporations, businesses, and individuals. So we know that that's coming. He's going to reduce the 7-point tax bracket to roughly 3, reduce the corporate tax rate. The big sticking item is going to be Paul Ryan, whether or not there's going to be a border adjustment tax or not. It's very unpopular, but Paul Ryan says, you know, that's how you make this revenue neutral, because if that's put into place, it will generate $1 trillion in revenue. Right. However, it's unpopular with the business sector, as you know.
Although, Tim, we did hear earlier, and I think, as a matter of fact, it was yesterday, with Steve Mnuchin, and it feels like the White House is now going to go out there with the plan that they're going to argue, hey, forget about revenue neutrality for a moment and think about growth. Think about supply side economics and the success that we've had, that we had under Ronald Reagan, and sell it that way. Does that make it easier to get through some of these things, particularly on the other end, where they're going to start perhaps getting rid of some deductions that a lot of people have come to cherish and believe are entitlements?
I hope they do go big and that they don't feel chained to this reconciliation effort. They go big with this tax cut. I think the border adjustment tax that some in the House leadership have suggested is dead in the Senate. I don't think House members are going to want to walk the plank for a bill that's going to die in the Senate. Then they have to explain why they voted for a $1.2 trillion consumer tax over 10 years. So I think the border adjustment tax is dead. And I do applaud Trump on wanting to lower and flatten corporate rates and individual rates and root out some of these special interest exemptions, Charles, that you mentioned. I hope they go there. It's time to clean up the code.
Do you think that state deductions are special interest?
I think that I know. I think you ought to have a lower, flatter rate across the board. And I think, in answer to your question, no, I don't. I think we should get rid of those. Absolutely.
Really? So here's the thing, David. Corporate taxes, personal taxes, individual taxes, all in the same bill seems like a major stretch. But we're also dealing next week with a potential government shutdown. And from what I understand, there's some negotiation going on with Democrats trying to lure some of them in return for not shutting down the government. Could that play a role here in the art of the deal?
I think it's going to be critical that they reflect the funding priorities the president has. He wants to increase national defense spending. It's been dramatically cut. He wants to build the wall, and I think that'll run into tough times with the Democrats. But I think on national defense and some of the other priorities, they can reach a compromise. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but I think they can do it. By the way, we have a mantra about tax cuts and the debt, and we basically say for pro-growth, cut taxes; to deal with the debt, cut spending. Don't raise taxes.
But there's no political will to cut any significant spending, though, David.
I know they've got to decide that they have to do that.
Charles, actually, if you look at the Medicaid reform, one thing we like in this health care bill, we have some issues with it, but the Medicaid reforms are going to lower spending, give states more flexibility. I think that's an example of Republicans in the House being willing, and the administration, to make dramatic changes to a program that impacts 70 million Americans, Medicaid, and does it poorly, by the way. It's a miserable program for the folks who are stuck in it. But I do think that's an example of a big idea that will reform a bureaucracy and lower spending.
What happens, Adriana, if this thing is so complicated, so ambitious that they take their eye off the ball because on Friday they have to figure out a way to keep the country funded, and I don't think that's getting enough press right now. I think that's an issue that we could find our government scrambling because, of course, President Trump wants to keep that going, but he would love to be able to use it as leverage as well.
That's right. And look how much fallout Republicans paid a huge price, especially Senator Ted Cruz, for getting blamed for shutting the government down over Obamacare last time around. And so we can't have this. We don't want to see the government shut down. President Trump needs to get it right on tax reform. I do believe a lot of these cuts will, I agree with Steve Mnuchin, they will pay for themselves. It will generate robust economic recovery, like cutting the corporate tax rate down from 35 to, let's say, 15, and putting more money in Americans' wallets, especially small businesses, is also going to create a lot of jobs. But I agree, we have to cut spending. That is a really important piece of this. We know the government likes to overspend, and we need to start cutting this pork pretty dramatically.
I am thrilled that somehow Republicans have rediscovered Ronald Reagan and supply side economics, and I'm shocked they didn't. I'm really shocked they didn't come out the gate using this as a selling point. But I will also say, I don't think we're going to get 15% on the corporate side. I think we're going to get 25% as some form of a compromise, David. But when we talk about this, and we've talked about it over and over again, it feels simple, right? We have these conversations. We're on TV. Everyone says, yeah, all you do is this and all you do is that. Why is it so much more difficult in reality to get this done?
Well, you've got to line up a majority of the House. By the way, I predict the House will keep the government funded, and a majority of the Senate, the Republicans, will keep it funded. The question comes, will 48 Democrats try to shut down the government? This time it's on them if the government doesn't stay open. It's not on the Republicans.
What about the 216, though, to get the health care through on the House side?
That's going to be tougher, but I think you're close to a compromise. Everybody will say it's not perfect, but I think they'll get it done and send it over to the Senate.
Who's going to blink, though? I'll let you get in, but I've got to ask David because he's got a lot vested in this. Club for Growth, you guys have spent a lot of money. You have stood your ground. The Freedom Caucus has stood their ground, even the Tuesday group. Someone's going to have to blink a little bit more than the others. Who do you think it will be?
Well, right now, the conservatives are really swallowing a lot because the current proposal on the table still leaves a lot of those Obamacare regulations in place. So I think they've said, look, we'll meet you halfway. And I think the moderates, they have more to lose because they're all committee chairmen and the speaker can come and say to them, we got to get this done.
All right, Tim, real quick.
Charles, every Republican in the House and Senate has a lot to lose, moderate or conservative or leadership, if they fail to keep a promise they made in 4 consecutive elections to roll back, at a minimum, what they really need to do is repeal it. So they all have a lot to lose. I think they realize that. I think they're redoubling their efforts to get this done, and I have a feeling they're going to get it done.
Yeah, I know the party wants to get a big W for the president, but a lot of people feel like maybe they promised different things to different. Yeah, well, the problem is a lot of them feel like they've made different promises to their different constituents. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. We've got a special programming.